In 2006, Microsoft came out with the Zune, which some news outlets nicknamed the iPod killer, because ever since the original iPod came out in 2001, Apple hadn't faced any serious competition, and Microsoft wanted to change that. They had billions of dollars and endless resources to create an incredible product that would blow the iPod away, and at first glance, the Zune appeared to be a superior product, with unique features like a 3-inch display, an FM radio, Wi-Fi, and brown. But when you looked closer, its flaws began to show, so let's find out why the Zune failed. But first I want to thank Fume for sponsoring this video, who leads the flavored air industry, which is quickly becoming the leading alternative to vaping and smoking. Fume has no vapor and no nicotine, so it isn't addictive. It offers great flavors like crisp mint and orange vanilla, so you can satisfy your oral fixation through a passive diffusion system that has no electronics, batteries, or combustion. Fume has served over 300,000 customers, and you can be the next success story. For a limited time, my viewers can use the code AppleExplained to get a free topper that slips onto the mouthpiece for a softer, warmer feel. Head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, and use code AppleExplained, or scan the QR code on screen to get your free Fume topper when you order your Journey Pack today. Now, there was so much not to like about the Zune that the product eventually became a running joke in pop culture.
Hey, Bill, would you help me program my Zune? Oh, wait, I have an iPod like the rest of the world. Why, you?
But as I mentioned before, it did have some interesting features, like its 3-inch display, which was fairly large for MP3 players at the time. And its interface had some surprisingly modern touches, like the ability to set a custom wallpaper, which the iPod couldn't do, or the large letters that appeared when quickly scrolling through lists, something Apple later introduced to the iPod. And the volume indicator that appeared on the side of the screen was recently implemented on iPhone. When a song was played, the Zune would show full-screen album art, whereas the iPod displayed a small photo of the album. There were also pretty cool hardware features, like listening to FM radio if you wanted a break from your song library, or Wi-Fi, which was uncommon on mobile devices in 2006. And although the brown color was controversial, at least it was offered in more than just black and white, unlike the iPod. But don't get too excited about the Zune, because there were some serious drawbacks, like, for example, the Wi-Fi, which didn't actually give you access to the internet. It was only there to share songs and photos wirelessly. And you couldn't share those files by email or to other Wi-Fi enabled devices, it only worked with other Zunes. And the product was so rare that finding another Zune user was nearly impossible. But even if you did, there were more limitations. A shared song or video could only be played 3 times, and it took about 15 seconds to share a song. That meant sharing just 4 songs was a minute-long process, something Steve Jobs felt was too slow. He said, "You're much better off to take one of your earbuds out and put it in their ear. Then you're connected with about 2 feet of headphone cable." But what may have been more concerning is that Microsoft named the file-sharing feature squirting, and they really tried to make it a thing. Then CEO Steve Ballmer said, "I want to squirt you a picture of my kids, you want to squirt me back a video of your vacation, that's a software experience." But the true Zune experience began when unboxing the device. It greeted users with the phrase, "Welcome to the social," which made people wonder if they'd bought an MP3 player or signed up for a social media service. And that's because Microsoft had plans to create a full-fledged social network centered around music. It would be called Zune Social, and took a lot of inspiration from the website Last.fm. Users could share the music they were listening to with friends, view recently played tracks and favorite artists, earn badges based on the number of plays of artists or genres, and gain a reputation score based on their interactions within the Zune Social website. The idea was pretty clever. Microsoft could seamlessly integrate a music player with a social music platform for the first time, similar to their successful Xbox and Xbox Live business model. The problem was, this Zune Social website wasn't ready when the original Zune player launched, so users were less welcomed to the social as they were welcomed to disappointment, or even frustration. Ryan Block from Engadget actually wrote an article titled "Installing the Zune Sucked," and went on to describe his horrible experience. In his article, Block said, "We'd hoped installing the Zune software and getting our player running would be as seamless and painless as getting iTunes and an iPod running on your machine, since that is, after all, what it's up against. Unfortunately, the reality of our experience with the first version of the Zune software this afternoon is much like that of many version 1 software experiences. It sucks." Block then posted the 18 different menus he had to go through to set up his Zune, and they contained some interesting images. Like this one, which said, "Spread the music," except instead of showing off the device's wireless song sharing feature, it showed two people sharing one pair of earbuds, which is exactly what Steve Jobs said users would prefer doing. Another image said, "Free your inner DJ," with what appeared to be a guy rapping or singing into a microphone, which is not what DJs do. And the Zune itself had no DJ-related features like song remixing or recording. But those misleading images were just the beginning. Next, Block had to connect the Zune to his PC, where he was notified that the device had already been set up on someone else's computer. He said, quote, "We've never touched this Zune in our life, but it's a review unit. Maybe they tested it before shipping it to us." So he removed all its content to sync with his own PC, and that's when the software crashed. He started the setup process over and made it to the library settings menu, then the stream to Xbox 360 menu, the create your library menu, the create your Zune tag menu, the are you sure you don't want to create your Zune tag menu, then he finally made it inside the app itself, which promptly crashed again after he clicked the options button. He had to start the process all over again and decided to enter a Zune tag this time in case that's what caused the crash, and had to enter his live ID, username and password, enter additional account information which required a phone number, then a congratulations window, an add Microsoft points window because music here can't be purchased with actual money, then a complete your purchase window, and that's when the software crashed a third time. So Block reopened it, went to the main marketplace page where he tried clicking the options button again when the software crashed a fourth time. This was the perfect example of Microsoft in the 2000s, the world's richest software company and capable of making reliable software. Now, this was only one person's experience, and there were reviewers who said the setup process was fairly easy and only took about 20 minutes. But compared to iPod, which effortlessly integrated with users' existing iTunes software and account, the Zune fell short. Now, once you were finally inside the Zune marketplace, users were faced with more challenges. Remember the Microsoft points I mentioned earlier? That was the currency system used to buy music. One song cost 79 points, which was equal to about 99 cents. But you couldn't just pay 99 cents to buy 79 points to buy one song, since points were only sold in bundles. 400 points cost $5, 800 points cost $10, and the largest bundle was 8,000 points for $100. And if you do the math, buying in bulk didn't save you any money. This meant a 79-point song always cost 98.75 cents, or a quarter of a penny less than on iTunes. But because you were forced to buy points in bundles, you always had some left over. Buying 5 songs with 400 points left you with 5 points, which wasn't enough to spend on anything. Many users found this system annoying, but Microsoft defended it by saying, quote, "The system was intended to reduce the number of individual credit card transaction fees Microsoft would have to manage for its users." And at least they were honest, because the point system existed solely for Microsoft's benefit. Making one purchase of 400 points meant one credit card fee for Microsoft instead of 5 separate song purchases, which would incur 5 separate fees. Also, it encouraged users to spend more. If you only wanted one song, you had to buy 400 points to get it, forcing you to pay $5 instead of 99 cents. Now, to make things even more confusing, the Zune Marketplace also offered a subscription model that didn't use their point system. Instead, for $15 per month, users could stream and download an unlimited number of songs from the marketplace, and permanently keep 10 songs each month. This was actually a pretty good deal. Considering those 10 songs were worth about $10, then the subscription really only cost $5 a month, much less than the $11 to $12 we're used to paying today with services like Apple Music and Spotify. But music streaming in 2006 was not popular, mainly because MP3 players didn't have an internet connection. And despite the Zune having Wi-Fi, it was only used for file sharing, not music streaming. So most users ended up purchasing and downloading songs instead. But the convoluted setup of Zune Marketplace was nothing compared to the product's marketing, which featured videos of dogs itching themselves and animals eating each other. When researching for this video, I found a few Zune ads on YouTube that I had to double check were real because they were so strange and hardly featured any Zunes, like this one which showcased a dog itching its ear. Or this one with dogs meeting up in a park.
Open your ears, this is a story. It isn't clear, is he a fool or a god?
Or this one, which does feature someone using a Zune, but it's sped up so fast that you can't actually tell. And just listen to the song choice.
Lady, ooh, you lady, you lady, you lady, you lady, ooh.
But my personal favorite is this animated ad of a lion slowly eating the body parts of a gazelle. So keep in mind that while Apple was putting out iconic iPod ads like this, Microsoft was trying to sell Zunes by showing dogs and a lion consuming its prey. So when MP3 customers had no idea what a Zune was, Microsoft's poor marketing was largely to blame. Plus, the lack of any social features was extremely misleading. After seeing taglines like "Welcome to the social," "Spread the music," and "Free your inner DJ," many customers expected an experience centered around those things. But there was no Zune social during the device's first year, sharing music was limited to other Zune users, which were extremely rare, and DJing had nothing to do with the Zune. There was a big disconnect between what Microsoft promised and what they actually delivered, leaving many customers disappointed, since the core features of Zune were better executed by iPod, something customers quickly realized after beginning to use the device. For example, its larger 3-inch display was quite blurry because it had the same exact resolution as the smaller iPod screen, making its pixels larger and the display less sharp. Its plastic chassis felt less premium than the metal iPod, and its overall design was 14% heavier, 29% thicker, and 34% larger by volume. When users saw the Zune's circular button pad, they assumed you could spin it like an iPod's click wheel. But you couldn't. It was just a simple 4-way directional pad. And while it offered the same 30 gigabytes of storage as the 5th gen iPod, it came preloaded with songs, music videos, short films, and images that took up about a gigabyte of space, which is equal to about 250 songs. So to fit as much music on the Zune as possible, users had to spend time deleting all its pre-installed content. Overall, the Zune was a decent MP3 player, although few considered it to be better than iPod, and at the end of the day, Microsoft was trying to achieve total market dominance as they'd done with PCs. In fact, Zune wasn't even Microsoft's first time in the MP3 market. That happened in 2003. 2 years after the original iPod, Microsoft implemented a strategy to compete by creating an operating system that could be licensed to third-party manufacturers. It was called Portable Media Center, and it was used by MP3 makers like Creative, Philips, iRiver, Samsung, and Toshiba. That's why those companies had Windows logos on their products. But the software wasn't well optimized. It was sluggish, unintuitive, and pretty ugly. This resulted in most customers choosing iPod over Portable Media Center devices. So when developing their own music player, Microsoft created a modern version of their MP3 software with an improved interface and smoother functionality. But there was one issue. Microsoft wanted to release the Zune in time for the 2006 holiday season, so to speed up the hardware development process, they collaborated with Toshiba and used almost all the internal parts from their Gigabeat for the Zune, including the display. Because of this, the Zune was burdened by the same issues as the Toshiba Gigabeat. like, for example, only supporting 3 audio formats, while the iPod supported 8. In fact, out of all the popular MP3 players on the market, only the Zune and Gigabeat had this limitation, which was a bit odd, considering the WAV format was literally created by Microsoft, but not supported on their music player. Stranger still was that Microsoft never officially admitted that they'd used any parts from the Gigabeat. That discovery was made by Jason Chen from TechCrunch, formerly CrunchGear, who wrote this. CrunchGear has a scoop from a source that confirms the first-generation Zune is an OEM'd Toshiba Gigabeat, combined with some added-on features and functionality made just for Microsoft. Microsoft had to contract Toshiba to build this first unit so they could rush the player out in time for Christmas 2006. And reviewers felt the effects of this decision, with the Washington Post saying, "The new Zune digital media player may be an all-Microsoft production, but it feels like it came from 2 companies." And their feelings were later confirmed by FCC filings revealing Toshiba did in fact manufacture the Zune. And 2 years later, a New Year's software bug that forced all Zune players into an endless shutdown loop also happened to affect Toshiba Gigabeat players, proving that the 2 devices not only had the same internals, but also shared software code, as the issue was caused by the devices not being programmed to recognize leap year. So at first glance, it appeared Microsoft had a decent iPod competitor, with a larger display, Wi-Fi features, and brown. But their poor execution of its hardware, marketing, and services left many customers wanting more. In its first year, Microsoft sold over 1 million Zunes, which wasn't a bad performance, but compared to the iPod, which sold almost 10 million, they had a long way to go. So Microsoft went to work on the next generation of Zune players to be released in 2007. Microsoft introduced 3 second-generation models, the full-size Zune 80 and smaller Zune 4 and 8. The 80 was redesigned to be 12% thinner and almost 20% lighter, making it more comparable to the iPod 5G. The 4 and 8 models were similar to the iPod Nano, with 1.8-inch displays in a more compact package. All 3 models had a new touch-sensitive directional pad that made navigation faster. With a flick, users could quickly scroll through a list while using the built-in buttons to make more precise selections. But the most important new features were Wi-Fi syncing, which allowed Zunes to sync with a computer without being plugged in, a new user interface which had a modern thin typeface, and the launch of Zune Social, where users could see what their friends were listening to, send song links, and post comments. But again, once users tried these capabilities, they discovered limitations. For example, Wi-Fi syncing didn't require being plugged into your computer, but it did require being plugged into a power cable. So many users just connected it to their computers anyway, since that made transfer speeds faster. Also, all those Zune social features were only accessible from a computer, and while there was a social menu option on the device, it only allowed for wireless song and video sharing. And while the updated interface did look good, it was ruined by a low-resolution display, which was still 320 by 240 and was made worse compared to the previous model due to the larger 3.2-inch screen, which made the pixels bigger and easier to see. So while improvements were made, the second-generation Zune lineup still wasn't seen as a superior option to the iPod. A reviewer from Wired said, "If you're not invested in the iPod iTunes ecosystem, it's the most polished competitor I've seen to date. But realistically, it's hard to imagine the Zune convincing people to ditch their iPods if they already have one. There's still not quite the elegance of the Apple user experience." Now keep in mind, these second-generation Zune players came out in November 2007. That meant Microsoft wasn't only competing with iPod, iPod Nano, and iPod Shuffle, they were also competing with the new iPod Touch and iPhone, which made the Zune look even less capable in 2007 compared to the previous year. Because while Microsoft had just adopted a touch pad, Apple had moved on to touch screens. While the Zune's display increased to 3.2 inches, the iPod Touch was at 3.5 inches, with a much higher resolution of 480 by 320. And Wi-Fi with full internet browsing allowed iPod Touch to access music social media sites like Last.fm or SoundCloud, while the Zune couldn't even access its own Zune Social website. Microsoft had just gotten started in the MP3 market at a time when consumers were turning away from MP3 players altogether and towards smartphones like iPhone, with iPod sales peaking the following year in 2008. But Microsoft wasn't known for their foresight. Instead of shifting their strategy and creating a Zune smartphone, they continued developing MP3 players. At the end of 2008, Microsoft released the third generation of Zune, and many expected them to have features similar to iPod Touch, like touchscreens, an internet browser, and an app store. But the new Zune models had none of those things. Instead, Microsoft doubled down on features of the past, like improving the FM radio experience by letting users buy songs directly from the radio, or adding on-device Zune social functionality that allowed users to interact with each other and share music over the internet. These features would have been nice to have on the first generation model, but they were insignificant additions at a time when the App Store allowed iPod Touch and iPhone users to do just about anything. And the sales numbers proved this. In the fourth quarter of 2008, Zune sales had dropped 54% compared to 2007. It was pretty clear that Microsoft had failed to compete with iPod, and history was starting to repeat itself with iPhone. Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer was asked if they would make a Zune phone to stay competitive with Apple, but Ballmer replied, quote, "Customers should not anticipate a Zune phone. Instead, Microsoft could incorporate Zune's core features into other Windows-powered mobile phones," which was just an odd strategy. But it stemmed from a very real fear that by creating their own smartphone, Microsoft would be competing with themselves, since Windows Mobile was already a popular platform used by smartphones and PDAs, so the Zune remained an MP3 player, and at the end of 2009, the fourth generation was revealed, this time with a touchscreen model called Zune HD meant to compete with iPod Touch, although it didn't deliver the same features. Its display was smaller at 3.3 inches, its third-party app support was severely lacking with just a handful of options, and its internet browser worked but was unintuitive and difficult to use for an extended period. Even with its low $220 price, most customers opted for the $300 iPod Touch instead. By the end of 2010, the overall MP3 market shrank 20%, while the smartphone market grew an incredible 70%. It was obvious that customers preferred all their content on a single device, music included. Microsoft had transformed Windows Mobile into Windows Phone 7, which had a section called Zune that accommodated multimedia features like music and video. This made the actual Zune player even less relevant, as customers who had a Windows Phone no longer needed a standalone MP3 player. So the following year, in 2011, Microsoft announced this: "We will no longer be producing Zune players. Going forward, Windows Phone will be the focus of our mobile music and video strategy." So while they finally began putting effort into smartphones, Microsoft still refused to make their own hardware, opting instead to license their Windows Phone OS to third-party manufacturers. This is one of many mistakes they made in the smartphone market, and you can learn the whole story in my previous Windows Phone video. But when it came to services like Zune Social and the Zune Marketplace, Microsoft kept them open, but their days were numbered. In 2012, Zune Social was shut down, and in 2015, Zune Marketplace was closed, with Microsoft encouraging users to migrate to their new service called Groove Music. But that was also shut down just 2 years later in 2017. So the Zune never became very popular, but it did attract a dedicated group of fans that have kept the discontinued device alive. There's a fan-operated website that provides a server to activate old Zunes that would otherwise be unusable, and provides system resources, artwork, and backgrounds that may have otherwise been lost. So that is why the Zune failed. Thanks to Fume for sponsoring this video. This is Greg with Apple Explained. Thanks for watching till the end, and I'll see you in the next video.